Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. This is the third video in a row where I'm motivated to talk about the Iran protests over the death of Mahsa Amini. Um, she was killed by morality police, and that's triggered almost a week of demonstrations in Iran and in many Iranian communities around the world since then. Today, and specifically, I want to talk about the context again of COVID over the last 2 years. I believe should change the way that many of us in the West treat these sorts of demonstrations and treat freedom and tyranny and discussions about it concerning foreign countries. I think a lot of us, even myself, have a prejudice that we're often implicitly making or often explicitly making that, well, these are faraway cultures that are radically different. They are, either communist people that have been raised under communism, or they're in the Middle East, or they're very Islamic influence, or they're from just totally different kinds of backgrounds than we have here in the United States, and people here in the United States or in the West, and they'll point to sort of Christian, foundations through sort of the history of Christianity, or history that comes out of sort of the Greeks and democracy that goes back that far, or whatever kinds of differences people want to point to justify why maybe we shouldn't expect these faraway, strange cultures and people to have the same kind of respect and desire for freedom as do we. And I think what COVID did, one way to interpret what COVID did, was not per se to change our view of all of these faraway others. I mean, it will change that, but really what it did, and if you watched it carefully and you weren't entirely on the COVID cult bus the entire time, what you saw was, no, we are just like these faraway people that we often say, well, their countries are always going to be without freedom because it's just their nature or their culture's nature to be that way, and they don't value it, and we would never fall prey to those kinds of forces that they're under. And we saw that we fell under the sway of the same kinds of forces that bring about totalitarianism, that bring about these kinds of righteous movements that can infect society and cause ills for generations, for long periods of time, as we've seen in Iran for now 2 or 3 generations, depending on how you want to count. It's not what COVID taught us is not so much that these faraway peoples are like us. What it taught us is that no, we are just like the stereotypes that we often said. Like we're prone to the same kinds of dark forces that we often accuse them, or implicitly accuse them of being susceptible to. We ourselves are just like them, and we saw it over the last 2.5 years. Overnight, people went from freedom respecting, whether they were conservatives, liberals, or even libertarians. These people flipped overnight into being all for draconian, civil rights violating interventions in all aspects of society. And you had to do it or you were a denier. You had to do it or you were a grandma killer. You had to do it or you were a conspiracy theorist or a racist, in all of the which terms, that is WITCH terms, that modern societies use rather than using the actual term, which they, the whole defense and bulwark of freedom that we all walked around with prior to 220 got turned on its head overnight. We have no stronger intuitions and bones for civil liberties than does the rest of the world that doesn't have civil liberties right now. And we see that we didn't have bones for it because as soon as we were afraid, as soon as there was a perceived emergency, all of these things were turned on their head. So what I want to point out today is it should change the way you think about the Iranian protesters, about the poor folks in China or North Korea, all of the places where they're under the thumb of governments. These people are like you. Instead, the other way around. We found what COVID taught us is that we are one small emergency away one perceived emergency away from throwing away our own civil liberties. We are no different from them. Yes, they seem far away. That has nothing to do with why they're in the state that they are. They're in the state that they are because of the same kinds of psychosocial forces that we saw a glimpse of over the last 2.5 years. If we're lucky, we'll get ourselves out of it. They weren't lucky, and we need to speak up when the Iranian people now have a chance to potentially throw off that tyranny. Let's hope that they do. That was your science moment.